Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out...
This is episode 54, and the end of 2019. Mm-hmm. We're recording this on Sunday, December 29. The last Sunday of 2019, the last Sunday of this decade, the last Sunday of the first fifth of this century. We could slice this and dice this any number of ways. But we didn't really prepare for this podcast. That's okay. I mean, we've got... Over here, we've had Christmas, we've got New Year's coming up. I'm busy with a client. You've got New Year's coming up, and then Christmas. So we really haven't had a chance to talk about it. And as I look at the news, Cvetin, there's news, obviously, but people are, rightly, I think, focused on family and friends and the holidays, whether it's Christmas or New Year's or the coming Orthodox Christmas, and they shouldn't be so much focused on the news. And so I think for this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast, and I should mention that my name is Jason MacColl. I'm coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains, which are covered in snow in Oro Valley, Arizona. Yes.
And this is Cvetin and Jason, also in a snow mountain surrounded Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, in a pretty cold December evening. It's
beautiful.
It's at least, I guess it's warmer over there at least, no?
Well, I'll tell you, when I woke up this morning, it was -2 Celsius, and the high today will only be about 10 Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit, so 29 degrees Fahrenheit this morning. So yeah, we had this storm blow through here, and it's sunny and blue skies, snow-covered mountains, as I mentioned, but it's cold for us, desert rats. But again, as I was saying, people are rightly focused, I think, on family and friends and not so much on the news. It's kind of funny. I've scrolling, that's it, scrolling through the hashtag Macedonia Twitter feed earlier today, and, there's huge gaps. I mean, you just take a few scrolls and all of a sudden you're in yesterday. In other words, people aren't posting, which I think is frankly better, because they're not focused on their laptops and their tablets and their phones and wildly looking for news and things like that. So in that spirit, I think with this episode, we just kind of look at the year in review. We could look at the decade in review. We could look at the past 20 years in review. But certainly it's been well, look, here's the thing. And I just published this article, my weekly column. I put it up on Medium in English. We'll have it published in Macedonian shortly. The title of which is Abundance. And we think about what's happened in the past year, not just in Macedonia, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And frankly, this is the best time ever to be alive in human history. People are living longer, infant mortality rates are down, life expectancy is up, poverty rates are down, more people have electricity and potable drinking water. By any measure.
Smartphones.
Everything. By every measure imaginable, this is the best time ever to be alive. 100 years ago, life expectancy, even in the industrialized countries, was just... I mean, think about this. Social Security here in the United States, when it was implemented, I think you can take full Social Security at 65 or 67, I can't remember. But back then, and that was in the 40s when I think it was created, people were dying shortly after that of natural causes. Life expectancy wasn't much beyond that, and now I don't even know what it is for American males and American females. American females live longer than American males. But, it's up in the 70s. So and that has other implications. My point being that people are just living much longer today than they did just 70 years ago at the end of World War II. So it's a great time to be alive, despite all of the problems that we all face as individuals and as countries. Macedonia, of course, this year faced something that most countries and most people will never, ever face, and that is the absolute outright theft of their name and their identity, their patrimony, by Macedonians, no less, with the aid and assistance of certain corrupt Western elites.
We're busy denouncing those guys, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the good news is that I like to tell the story. Abraham Lincoln, one of America's greatest presidents, kept the Union together, took a civil war to do it, ended slavery. But 20 years before that, he gave a speech. It's called the Young Men's Lyceum speech. So he was talking to a group of students, and he told the story of a ancient and wise king who brought all of his wise men together and said, "I'd like to have you create a phrase that I can use in any situation. It'll work for whatever." So the wise men all got together, and they thought, and they debated, and they deliberated. Finally, they came back to the king, and they said, "Oh, king, we have the phrase that you can use in any and every situation, and it is this: and this too shall pass." Works for everything. For the bad times, it also works for the good times. But with regard to Macedonia and what Macedonia has been going through, this too shall pass. I still firmly believe that Macedonia's name and identity will be returned to them, but it's going to take a lot of hard work and probably more pain and difficulties and whatnot. But it can and it has to be. Yeah, I think
it's, as you said, you painted a rosy, optimistic picture, but we see that people are restless everywhere and around the world, and I'd say it's because we are now, most of Western societies, including Macedonia and the United States, are in a decline, and just consider, obviously we had enormous problems 50, 100 years ago, but we had a forward-moving trajectory for the next generations, and technological advances were such that unimaginable things were being put into motion, and all the countries were assured in themselves that they're growing. They were arguing over expansion, over where to accommodate their large future generations, and how to best build infrastructure for the coming posterity. While now we're all in a decline, in the sense that sure, technology advances, but it's just like a better smartphone every few years. It's not the remarkable technology for people who never saw a car to see something like that, or an airplane, or curing illnesses by vaccines. And so we are just improving on things that have been come up with by previous generations. And as for the direction of the country, it's pretty doubtful who we are leaving the countries to, because given the demographics, we're still arguing over territory, but none of the countries, at least, in the Balkans, where we used to fight so bitterly over Macedonia, and each of the countries which was fighting for Macedonia was assured that if it was able to conquer it, it would have a growing population to settle it and to colonize it, make it its own, assimilate what it will not expel or kill from the native population, and replace the rest with more Greeks, Serbs, Bulgarians, whatever, Albanians. Now even the Albanians are facing a huge inflation of people, let alone deflation, sorry, let alone all the other countries who have long given up on the ideas of a greater state. But so, okay, it's on one hand, we might be becoming less aggressive, except on Facebook and Twitter. but on the other, we are, it's difficult not to describe this as a decline, and it opens all sorts of other new problems, which might become even, as dangerous as the was before. The problem of where to accommodate all the growing youngsters, and now we have a problem. How do we maintain what we have at this point with these shrinking deathbed demographics and everybody moving out of the country? And people are looking warily toward the neighbors who have a slightly less bad demographic, or toward migrants, or countries, Asian countries or African countries which might have designs on Europe, inviting some old hostilities and hatreds. So it's we are comfortable like never before, but the purpose is somehow misplaced.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. And so when I talked about being alive, this is the greatest time in history to be alive. Obviously, yes, materially, physically, financially, economically, all of these things, yes. But your point is very well taken. There's a spiritual crisis in Western civilization, a crisis of meaning. People are more and more, we see people leaving the church, and when I say the church, I mean, Christendom, and they are rejecting the faith of their fathers and mothers and those before them, and they think that they can find meaning in work, in social media, in whatever, and that creates a real crisis, and that's the spiritual crisis. Solzhenitsyn. I love to quote Russians, Cvetin, because it upsets some of our friends and some of our Western lady friends. Solzhenitsyn said, now he said this about the Russian people. He said, "Men have forgotten God," and I think in Western civilization today, the phrase would be updated to, not only have men forgotten God, men reject God, men and women, obviously. And that is the problem that we're facing. You mentioned the demographic crisis that the West is facing, especially Europe, which is dying, and women are not having, families aren't procreating, and the replacement rate is not being met, and so that's why so many European countries feel the need to import low-wage workers from other places. And as we know, and of course our friends on the left would scream bloody murder at us for saying this, populations other populations are certainly, we're welcoming countries. The United States was made by immigrants, but you have to assimilate, and our friends on the left don't believe that. And so that's where you have these cultural clashes that the late, great Samuel Huntington wrote and talked about. But again, to your point, it is a spiritual crisis, and I don't know how we're going to overcome that. I don't know if it can be overcome.
Yeah, we have this legacy from the wars 100 years ago, when a few very small Balkan countries just recently established were easily defeating Turkey, which was a feudal, country based on serf labor, very, unreformed, unreformable, ossified, the sick man of the Bosphorus, etc. And all these newly developed countries modeled after Austria, after England, Russia to a lesser extent, were industrious and fast growing, and they came up with the idea that they can replace, if they emancipate enough of the population, and obviously women liberation, this would greatly increase the number of people they can field in the factories, in the battlefield, etc. And they were kicking Turkey left and right. They were demolishing the Turkish armies before they all turned on each other to fight over the spoils. And this is how we got to this difficult situation we are now with regarding Macedonia and our neighbors, to the point that we are about to squander the victories of 100 years ago in the Balkans, and if it was, I don't know, let's say if it was a victory for Christendom, we are in a very good, we're far along the way of squandering it because of all the infighting that followed the Balkan Wars. But also we realized that it's a temporary gain if you modernize, if you abandon the old ways, if you abandon obviously all these reforms that had to be done in the Balkans, and then afterwards in Turkey under Ataturk were to the detriment of the established religion, of the traditions, of the old way of life, the pastoral way of life. And as we were abandoning this, now it was a temporary boost of the progressivism was a temporary advantage, but it's no way to establish a long-term functioning country. We overdid it. We still have these people. I mean, we have now the almost Prime Minister of Macedonia, Mila Tsarovska, this open society, educated, far-left activist who used to work on migrant rights, open borders issues, and supporting abortion in left-wing NGOs funded by Soros, and is now in the government, and it was very nearly appointed interim prime minister for the next few months. And they would still go around talking as if the patriarchy or the conservative values of the old way of life is the biggest obstacle to progress for the country, and as if we haven't gone the other side of progress maybe 30-40 years ago, as if we haven't gone far below replacement rate demographics and destroying the stigma of not forming a family, not getting married, not creating posterity. We have all gone past this. Nobody, you might face a few annoyed grandmothers and aunts during a celebration, during a family feast, who would keep bothering you. Why haven't you been married yet? Settle down and started having children. Yes. The time is ticking. There are those famous phrases such as, you pick your man while you're by age 25, and after 25 they pick you and may not pick you, etc. But nobody really. I mean, there is no organized. The policies are the statist policies are obviously not beneficial to founding a to starting a family. Actually, they lead to a lot of downsides economically if you choose this way. And we've seen that even though other neighboring countries are in similar difficulties, those who are least bad, such as the Albanians in Kosovo, not those in Albania, are growing, expanding. Even though they're relatively declining as well, and they're in absolute terms they're declining, but they're declining less relative to us, and so we have the least worst country expanding. We have the right. Cleanest dirty shirt, being. We've seen that we've proven that countries with different. Societal systems cannot coexist peacefully in the Balkans. We had one war with the Albanians, we had Kumanovo and all, constant fighting, including, the Albanian pressures on Macedonia over the name change, and Albanians gleefully playing a role they were cast in by the internationals who got involved in the renaming of Macedonia. So it's if we were all declining evenly, it would be depressing enough, but it's even more dangerous that some are declining faster than others here.
Yeah, well, and listening to you speak, I was thinking, that podcast that we want to do on conservatism. I really want to just jump into that right now, but we're going to say that you mentioned the issue of progress. Progress. I read an interesting line from our friend Jonah Goldberg the other day, in which he said, progress, rightly understood, means improvement. And there's nothing wrong with improvement and improving society. But our friends on the left have taken progress and progressivism and turned it into a modern day version of 1789, the French Revolution, in which they wanted to tear down everything about the past and start from year zero, as we've talked about many times on this podcast before, and even rename the months of the year and tear down the church, tear down the king, tear down the government, tear down everything and start over again. That's their idea of progress and progressivism, whereas we know as conservatives that the past is immensely important. And, to borrow Chesterton's phrase again, the democracy of the dead, we have to honor those who have come before us and what they have done and what they achieved and what they sacrificed for those achievements, and honor those by building upon them slowly and steadily. So yes, we do, as conservatives, we do believe in change, of course, but it's got to be slow and incremental, and it's got to be, you have to understand why it's being done. To go back to Chesterton, and I've got to figure out how to get this in one of my articles, and I don't think we've ever talked about this on this podcast, the story, and I'll have to get it for the Conservatism podcast in its fullness, but the brief one, it's called Chesterton's Fence.
Yeah.
And the idea that you're wandering through a forest or a valley or a field or something like that, and you come upon an old fence, and many, and some folks would say, okay, well, we just got to tear this down. Whereas the correct response is, why was this built in the first place, and what is its purpose? And that is understanding the past and building upon it and accepting what has come before us, etc. So, sorry, I'm not exactly sure how I got on that, but it was a nice little diversion there. It wasn't a rant, but just a nice little meandering diversion to talk about the past and the importance of those who've come before us, as opposed to those on the left that want to just tear everything down and start over again.
It's not you're not supposed to honor the sainted dead for their sake, but for your sake, because they've been to the similar issues. They were faced with similar problems. They came up with solutions which are timeless because they're based on human nature, and in some cases, if they're geopolitical issues, they would repeat themselves. We have 3,000 years of history of fighting over the same cities or gorges or narrow passes, etc., to the point that we can build our infrastructure, or the Serbian patterns of colonization in Macedonia after capturing it in 1913, they would follow the similar solution to how to best hold the country, which was set by the Byzantines. These are the key points. This is where you need to. Oftentimes they would build on the same place where there was an ancient city, which was a fortified city, and this is the place you need to hold in order to keep this territory. So it's everybody's been, you've got to be really arrogant to think that everything starts with you, and that you're the first one to come up with something and with a solution or with an idea, and to discard the accumulated wisdom, especially in this region we live in. But bunches of people do so. They say that we can discard the relatively easily won sovereignty of Macedonia, at least compared to some other neighboring countries. I don't know, God forbid, Bosnia or Croatia. But people think that you can just discard this in exchange for joining NATO and maybe, hopefully, opening EU accession talks. And they don't stop to think, well, there was a reason why nobody before them decided to give up on Macedonian name, and with it, as a symbolic gesture, give up on the sovereignty. It's not that nobody thought of this before. Hey, we can all give up everything, and then we'll be feted by the diplomats for like a few months before they forget about us.
Exactly, yes.
There was a reason why nobody did this.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, let's bring it back to kind of where we started talking about, how what Macedonia and Macedonians have faced this year with the ultimate in troubles and problems and a certain amount of pain and suffering, and that is the usurpation of your name and identity, your patrimony, as I said earlier, by Macedonians, combined with, of course, the Bulgarian so-called Treaty on Good Neighborly Relations. All of these things, I guarantee you that Zaev and people around him haven't thought it fully through all the implications of this, if it were to be followed all to its logical conclusion. And of course and it's kind of like, I think, the Oakwood Framework Agreement, so from 2001,
Yeah.
we keep hearing almost 20 years later that it still hasn't been fulfilled. There's still things that need to be done. The Western elites like to keep referring to it, and they put it in their preambles of their statements on this, that, and the other. And the whole point of it is that it never will be fulfilled. It never will be completed. And that is the same with the so-called Prespa Agreement and the Bulgarian Treaty, is that there is no end to these things. There are always newly created conditions that are going to be imposed and found and discovered within the treaties that have to be implemented, so that you have quote-unquote good neighborly relations with the Greeks and the Bulgarians.
Yeah.
And of course the Greeks and the Bulgarians will always be demanding these new things. As long as you give them to them, they will keep demanding them.
Yep.
They cannot be satisfied. And the Western elites will continue to go along with this. And so that is why I think you agree, that Macedonians have to stand up and firmly and politely say no. And this was wrong in the first place. It was done without the consent of the governed. And it has to be reversed.
Yeah, Gruevski was being declared like a radical, like a troublemaker, like a person who is deliberately making relations with neighbors worse, because he would not give in on their, not only he would not give in on their pressures, but he would come up with a not fundamental, he would come up with a gesture, not with a fundamental move that would deteriorate relations with Bulgaria or Greece. But he would give a very visible, clearly understandable, easy to understand message that there will be no appeasement, that any pressure will be met with an angry response, and that the nationalist politicians of our neighboring countries will not be able to score easy points on the detriment of Macedonia. Bulgaria declared that he was doing this to them. In reality, I mean, he really wasn't. Bulgaria was not the target of this. Clearly, it was Greece, and whenever Greece would violate the interim accord of '95, if you remember that one,
oh my goodness,
Gruevski would respond with a monument, which was clearly meant to say that the Greek prime minister will not be shown as easily pushing Macedonia around and Macedonians acquiescing to his pressure. And this was denounced by the internationals, but it had the result of getting the neighboring countries to back off, because they realized there were no easy points to be made here, so they would have to do something else to win votes in their respective countries. Now that this policy was turned on its head by Zoran Zaev and the internationals who are minding him, now all of a sudden we have a situation that there is no end to new troubles which are appearing, including Albanian territorial claims, Bulgarian claims on the Macedonian nation, and Greeks are basically just happy to see us continue to be blocked and glide along this path of debasing our national identity and ultimately losing it. So it was, we are abandoning the principle of national sovereignty.
Yes.
You don't have to like the way Gruevski was asserting it, but clearly this was an end to a response to the pressure. It was a firm rejection of appeasement. Now we are 100% on the path of appeasement, and there will be no end to humiliations. Every day brings another defeat for the Macedonian national identity, which is eventually
Right.
going to cost us the country.
Well, yeah. This is the thing. I don't know if people realize this. That if you know the old adage, if you repeat something long enough, if you repeat a lie long enough, people will believe it. And so if you continually say, if Macedonians are continually told by outsiders, and if some Macedonians themselves continually tell themselves and other Macedonians that they really don't have a history, and they really are manufactured out of thin air, and that they are, North Macedonians, quote unquote, eventually they'll believe it. That's human nature. And so you're right, Macedonia will disappear from the map and from history unless people stand up and start asserting their sovereignty, Macedonia's sovereignty, and their God-given right to their own identity and path forward. So, but that is up to that's up to the Macedonians to decide, and they have friends like me that are willing to help, but it's up to them to decide. Of course, the first I know we're not going to talk about news, but the first opportunity, real opportunity for that comes up in April with the elections, and we'll talk about that in another podcast. But yeah.
Yeah, well, in 2016, when we, both Macedonia and the U.S. faced these very interesting elections. I mean, Macedonia at the end of the political crisis sparked by SDSM, by Zaev, and the international diplomats here, and the U.S. at the end of this incredible, unbelievable, out of the blue primary season, and Trump and Hillary. And I remember making a comment somewhere that I'd rather, if I have to pick one winner, Nikola Gruevski or Donald Trump, I would pick Donald Trump, because if we lose, even if we win here in Macedonia, but then get Hillary in the U.S., everything will be for nothing. I mean, we were clearly targeted by a very serious operation emanating from the U.S. and from some European capitals and Brussels, which was not backing down even after the Kumanov attack, whoever organized that, and who had its set designs on redefining Macedonia and Macedonians. And I said, okay, maybe Trump wins and reverses this, stops this. He was definitely making this promise. I kind of got my wish, some of it. Trump won. Nikola also won, but was cheated out of forming the government. And then Trump proceeded to do nothing with regard to stopping or reversing the assault on Macedonia. And here we go again, 2020. We're going to have elections in the U.S. We're going to have elections in Macedonia. I believe that, again, both Trump and Vimmer are going to win. But this time, if I have to choose one winner, I would hope for a Vimmer win in Macedonia, because seriously, I mean, this is not normal what is happening here. It's going to end very badly very soon. There's not going to be an economic turnaround spurred by the European Union. There's not going to be a period of stability and security and sobriety provided by NATO membership. The foundational, the cornerstones have been seriously undermined, and unless we start putting things right here very quickly, it's definitely, this is going to be a very short-lived project, this North Macedonia thing, whatever you want to call it, this international protectorate with an undefined identity. It's going to end real badly, real soon. So this time I'm predicting / hoping for a Vimmer win over one for Trump, although obviously I would like to see both of them win, with distinction, serious wins.
No, completely agree with you. With your point on the hope amongst Macedonians, at least Macedonians of the conservative bent and their friends, that with the advent of the election of President Trump, that things would reverse themselves in Macedonia. They didn't. I think we were all disappointed by that. I think it also goes to show just how extremely entrenched and powerful the deep state, the administrative state, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, is here in the United States, and especially in the State Department. And the deep state is real. To quote two people from the opposite ends of the political spectrum, so Steve Bannon, who was Trump's campaign consultant chairman, I'm not sure what his title was, but at one point he said the deep state is right in front of your face. It's not hidden. John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, who voted for the communist candidate for president of the United States of America in 72 or 76, I can't remember which shows you what he was thinking as a young man, which makes you question his judgment as an old man. He said very plainly the deep state, he said he was thankful that the deep state existed. So, yes, it is real. You can call it whatever you want, but it's entrenched. It's civil servants. It's the career foreign service and others whose very careers and lives and livelihoods, and frankly their identities as human beings, depends on them staying in power and directing foreign policy, in the case that we're talking about, and not implementing the vision of the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, elected by the people of the United States of America. And, of course, as we know from many of Trump's speeches, including his inaugural speech, his speech in Warsaw early on in his presidency, etc., he talks a lot about sovereignty and about the right of individual nation-states to chart their own course in their own way. And then, of course, his State Department did everything that they could to thwart the will of the people of the Macedonian people. So, so that's what we're all up against with the State Department. It needs to be wholly reformed. I don't know if it can be or not, which creates other problems, but we'll set those aside for now. But yes, with your two predictions, I would completely agree with you. I do hope that Donald Trump is reelected, and I do hope that that Vumro gets into power and can turn some of these things around.
Yeah, and also we need to hope for let's not be naive. I mean, if there ever always was a deep state, or if there's going to be a deep state in the future, I mean, I'm not as opposed to having something like Operation Gladio in Europe, where the purpose was to make sure that socialists, I mean, people who are absolutely anti-civilizational, I mean, who are working to destroy what we call Western civilization, that to prevent them from coming in power. Now we have, ideally, in an ideal society, we would not have such a structure, such an apparatus, and elections would determine outcomes, and people would get what they voted for without any interference through the media, the judiciary, the secret police, etc. But if we are, back on planet Earth, if we're going to have a society with this type of institutions, you would hope they would work to protect the proven, the tested principles of which have built this society, built this civilization. And the worst outcome is, to have the populace voting one way, both in the cases of Macedonia, where the choice of the ethnic Macedonians, the majority nation in this country, and the majority in overall numbers at the elections was rejected, was denied, was cheated of their win. And in the US, where, it's a bit more complicated. The majority of the people voted against Trump, but majority of the people strewn across the country voted for Trump under the model. And then in both cases, in Macedonia and in the US, to have this secretive cabal of police, secret service officials, and judges and prosecutors who are complete partisans, and journalists who are complete partisans, and foreign diplomats meddling in the process and trying to overturn the outcome. And the worst of all would be the fact that the principles on which they stand have completely been debunked throughout history, that they are dangerous, they are anti-civilizational, are going to end in tears very quickly after being implemented. So now we're having the worst of all worlds, both here and in the US. And, another round of elections in the US in which Trump wins and is not allowed to govern, or in Macedonia where Mizar wins and is not allowed to even assume office, even nominally, like Trump. This would, this would be a disaster.
Right. No. Well, I think, and surveying the West, the one thing that we can take some hope from in having seen the deep state finally defeated is, of course, Brexit. And so with the astounding and resounding election of the Conservatives and Prime Minister Boris Johnson on December 12th in the UK means that Brexit is finally getting done, despite the fact that both Brussels and the establishment, a part of the establishment in London and the UK, the Remainers, tried to thwart the will of the people from 2016, almost 4 years ago, that the deep state has finally learned, and we have learned, that it can be defeated. I want to just quote real quick a column from the British author and philosopher Douglas Murray, writing in National Review about Brexit. He says, "And perhaps Brussels has also learned something, that a vote still means something to the British public, and that trying to go against what we decide at the ballot box is something we regard as fundamentally undemocratic, distinctly un-British, and in the final analysis, really not fair play." Actually, maybe we can put a link up on the podcast to that. It's a very good article that I think any people who are facing the deep state or the administrative state, whatever you want to call it, can take some solace in. And that's a great example, I think, perhaps maybe even to almost end this podcast, that yes, the deep state can be defeated, the will of the people can be upheld, and sovereignty can be restored.
Hear, hear.
Right.
And with this hopeful and optimistic note, let's conclude the last podcast of the decade, episode 54 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. And but yeah, we still have our farmers picks to do for this final episode. Have we something prepared, Jason?
Well, the only thing I can think of, I don't have anything prepared, to be honest. I just have been so busy between Christmas and work and whatnot. I don't have anything prepared, but I think I want to propose, Cvetin, that we have a joint farmers pick, and it's not something that we'll post on our in the notes, but we always like to end. I like to end. You like to end sometimes on a high note for Macedonia, and so I think our collective farmers pick this time should be the fact that Zoran Zaev is resigning in just a few days, and will no longer be the Prime Minister of the Republic of Macedonia.
Wow. Can't wait. It was an abomination for the country.
Yes. And on
I'm
that,
not using this word lightly.
On that good and high note, I think we can close out this podcast of 2019 and wish all of our listeners a very happy New Year's. Good talking to you, Cvetin.
You too, buddy. Take care.
The boys of the NYPD chorus are singing Galway Bride, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day.